Hi, now we're back on the south and east side of the property. You can see the watch factory in the back. And in front of you are what I call the two mirror oaks, Ore and Roe. Two of the same kind of tree. And if you got closer to them, you could see that they know how to grow so that they don't have any leaves that would be rubbing against each other. And next to it is the huge beech tree I call the baleful beech. And that reddish colored oak in the background. This area right along the river is the first research project from the Conservation Commission of Waltham. We'll be studying how to control the invasives and how to plant a more diverse number of trees, kinds of trees, in the place of those invasives. Now I'm scanning over to look up the mountain from this side, and you'll come upon a striking yellow tree. Look at that. Beautiful. That is a hickory, a shagbark hickory. And it always has that golden yellow color. Very similar again to the ginkgo. We've made it to one of the many peninsulas within the cemetery. Here we're looking across the river at the new Ward Avenue Bridge. It's been interesting to watch them build that over the course of the last year or so. They've had perfect weather. You can also see the shining yellow color of one of the evergreen vines that are here, and some of the orangey colors of the sugar maple on the left-hand side of this frame. This corner of the property also holds most of the most concentrated biodiversity. On this little stretch of riverbank, there are 18 species of trees growing together in the space of a small tennis court. There's a big group of sugar maples. Here's the big, huge oak tree that hangs over. The red hawk loves to be up there. And just behind that was the raccoon oak. A family of 5 raccoons lived in that tree for the last 5 years that I've been here. Just last week it fell into the river. Back out into the cemetery, you can begin to see all the sugar maples. Look at all that color. This year it's quite muted due to the drought. But it is stunning when it's really at peak. Here we're at another point at the cemetery. I think I would call it Bald Eagle Point. Because here at the confluence of this little area, at the top of a dead pine tree that you can barely see there, is where the 2 or 3 bald eagles hang out while they decide on which way they're going to go that day for their meal. We also have here some of the latest storm damage. This is from the microburst. I'm going to pan down. A huge oak tree fell over right on the right hand side of that frame. It made a hole in the ground 6 inches in diameter and about 3 feet deep. But that's all the depth it had in its roots, since it couldn't really grow underwater. And this is a nice little inlet. At the other end of this inlet is another large pine tree that's alive, and that is where the bald eagle now resides. Just past that oak tree. This inlet is also where I saw the bald eagle for the first time go fishing for live fish. A little inlet on the other side here was flowing with so little water, the bald eagle would jump down at the very front of the little river there and then chase the little fish upstream until it could step on them and eat them. And here we have what I call the father maple. So this big sugar maple is again right on the top of this little point. Look at the breadth on that. So one of the things I'm asked is, trees' lower branches grow up with the tree? No, everything only gets bigger in diameter. The reason this tree has so many branches so low is that, one, the deer probably didn't eat them when they were young, and they don't seem to be in the way of the caretakers of the property, so they're allowed to grow almost sideways and at head height. But again, the animals, particularly the insects, love hanging out on this shady little spot close to the ground. On the path to the point, one of the trees that we pass is the first tree that really caught my attention here in the cemetery. And I call this one the chicken oak, because I think it's very interesting structure there. Looked like a chicken beak, or at least the head of a chicken. So how does it stay alive, being so hollow like that? Again, the inside of the tree is for support. It is the outside along the bark that brings the nutrients and water up and down the tree. So that's what keeps the leaves alive and the wood alive. As we look up into the top of this pine tree, maybe we can catch the nest of the bald eagle. It's about 6 feet in diameter, right in the middle, right at the top. I'll tell you a funny story about the chicken oak. As I was learning about how trees worked and such, I was inclined to say, hey, we need to have a model tree to help teach us all of these different aspects of how trees live and work for us. And so I thought the chicken oak would be the perfect model candidate for this. But of course, he was chicken and declined. Now we're on the other side of the inlet where those bald eagles were fishing in the little stream. And this is and used to be a bigger little pine tree grove. But a month ago, when the microburst came through, it took down a big, huge, healthy pine tree. You can see it right at the end of this frame. No hollowness to it at all. So winds were in excess of 100 miles an hour. This tree ended up falling into, let me get around to the other side of me. Sorry if I'm making you dizzy. On the way, we have this wonderful oak grove. Lots of folks hang out here in the summer because it always stays cool up here. So that big pine tree fell onto this big, huge oak tree that you can see was not very much alive, but yet had so many green leaves and was huge. And that tree fell into another oak tree, which fell into another oak tree. We have all this damage right here, very close to the river. And the question I have is, what do we plant here now? That's one of the questions of the research project, is how can we increase biodiversity? Right around the corner from that site is an area along the side of the river where they used to unload boats and a lot. Might be able to see down under that yellow branch, another bit of yellow at the end of the frame. That path leads to the very tip of the the river at the point where there's a nice boat landing. And what is striking at the entrance to this is this huge honey locust tree. You can see the yellow fall color, very open. Locust trees are one of the few trees that make nitrogen in the soil by the bacteria associated with them, because they are in the bean family also. Now I've brought you to the newest section of the cemetery. This area of grass and small trees and again you can see Brandeis Castle and chimney in the distance. This is where the city used to put all of its trees and mulch and composting facility. But then they needed the space for what was its ultimate purpose, was a cemetery. So it was converted into these spaces with wonderful new small trees and an underground rainwater capture system. And these are all the oaks along the very edge of the river. And the Conservation Commission was responsible for saving these oaks as too important to cut down. All manner of wildlife is supported by this sliver of, again, virgin forest. And at the end of the frame is the small red maple that was planted, a few dozen trees to begin the succession plan here to replace these grand oaks, which might only be here for another 100 years. So, I've brought us to our final stop, the top of the mountain at Mount Feake Cemetery. As I go up this tree, you can see just to the left of the trunk the chimney of the watch factory. And on the right-hand side of the frame, just above the yellow foliage, again, you can see the watch factory building and some of the river. You can see down the valley, and in the wintertime, when there's no leaves, this is where you can see Boston. Everywhere we've been on this little journey, you can be in your car. This is the one spot where that cannot take, but it's a very short hike. And here I come to the little bulb of a mountain. I think there might have been an old radar installation bolted down to this rock, left over from World War II, or maybe a water tank. Notice the granite here. Notice the lichen. That's the grayish green life that clings to rocks and trees. There's many different kinds here at Mount Feake because it is such an old cemetery. It's one of the things I hope to study this year is the different lichen. So as we come out here, pan out, you can see the rock. And at the top of the mountain here, like many places in New England, where there are not deep crevices, we have lots of red oak and red pine. Lots of acorns, lots of pine nuts. So there's abundant nature here. The wild turkeys, the Canadian geese, raccoon, screech owl, bald eagle, all the different kinds of birds come here because this is where something is always blooming. Where there are flowers, there are insects. Where there are insects, there are birds. Where there are birds, there are eggs and droppings of tree seedlings, and nature just loves it. Just fell off the rock. So I wanted to show you and go over the map here. So we started here at Prospect Hill Bridge. Across the bridge is the watch factory. We came in the entrance and stayed to the right hand side of the mountain. Went around the mountain. Went out to this peninsula where we saw the Ward Avenue Bridge being built. And then all over to Bald Eagle Point, and then around the inlet to where the new cemetery was. And lastly, right back to the top of the mountain. It was great sharing these moments with you. I also highly recommend Mount Auburn Cemetery, where all the trees are tagged, and it has a bump of a mountain just like ours, from which you can easily see downtown Boston. So happy travels. Thank you.